we'll just get started. John DuPlissis is with the Natural Resources Research Institute out of Duluth. And John, if you just want to take it away.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm going to put the presentation up, and Lane, you can see that fine? Perfect, thank you. So yeah, as Lane said, my name is John DuPlissis. I'm the Forest and Lands Research Group Manager here. I was hired as the Silviculture Research Program Leader, and George Host, whom perhaps many of you knew, up and retired, and they decided to promote me. And so I blame George, and you all can blame George for that as well. So, but welcome. I'm here today to talk about the NRI's Forest Change Assessment and Simulation tool. And I want to thank you all for being here today. We're going to be providing an overview of this project today. We do have scheduled for September 29th, a half-day program at the Cloquet Forestry Center through the SFEC to provide folks with, I guess, what I call the look under the hood. For folks who want to know more about the models, how the models work, how the data was generated, and to be able to do a bit of a deeper dive as well as talk with the different modeling teams to perhaps get a better handle on what some of this output is and what it means and how to use it. So I hope to answer as many questions as I can today. I just want to make everybody aware that if this tool interests you, excites you, you're interested in learning more, we do have a program coming up here at the end of September through the SFEC that will give folks that opportunity. So with that, let me dive in. As I said, I'm part of the NRI. We'll talk a little bit about who we are, talk a little bit about why build a tool for managers to visualize future conditions, talk about how we built it, and then take you through just kind of a real simple review of the tool itself. This is the official rollout of the tool today. We'll be putting the link in the chat, and hopefully you all get a sense of how it works, how you can use it, and you'll have the link, and hopefully I'll hear from you about what you like and don't like down the road. So a little about NRI. We were created by the Minnesota legislature in the late 70s to basically help kickstart or jumpstart the economy of the Arrowhead region. For those of you who are kind of native or familiar or as old perhaps as I am, you'll remember the billboard on I-35 that said, "Last one to leave, turn out the lights." Duluth was fairly dire economic straits at one point. For those of you who are college students, I had good friends going to UMD at the time. They were paying rent for 3-bedroom apartments of $100 a month. There was so much surplus housing on the market at that time. So, and our vision is to discover the economy of the future. And kind of what does that mean? Well, it means really understanding what our resources are, diversifying the product portfolio of the region, converting waste into value, and embracing a life cycle thinking, life cycle ethic. So our 3 key research initiatives are ecosystem resilience, future forest industries. And so this includes really kind of that bioeconomy of the future, things like biochar or bioplastics. And then of course, iron and minerals of the future. Our expertise is placed into 5 research platforms: our applied ecology and resource management, minerals and metallurgy, materials and bioeconomy, data collection and delivery, and then of course our commercialization services. So there's some of our applied ecology research management right there. And within that ecosystems resilience initiative, our applied ecology and research program kind of combines or implements our ecosystem monitoring, forests and wildlife, Great Lakes, inland lakes, wildlife and rivers, wetlands and rivers, sorry, breeding bird atlas and forest management, ecosystem information tools, water remediation and ballast water treatment are all part of this initiative. So with that, that's us. And so let's talk about this tool. I like to say all good research starts with a question, and our leadership within NRI kind of asked the question: what will Minnesota's forests look like in the year 2100? We know that our markets are changing. The graph I pulled was from the Minnesota Forest Resources 2019 report. It goes back to 1998, but you can see we were at about 3.5 million in roundwood harvests, and we're down to about 2.8 now. We've seen changes in climate. Some of you have seen some of the presentations from the State Climatology Office. Our annual temperature trends are going upwards, but I always like the point they make. It's not just that it's upwards, but it's really in that last 40 years where it's taken a really sharp climb. And then people's values and priorities are changing, again, especially for those of us who've been around forestry for a while, and I know there's a few of you on the call today. We've seen huge changes in values of forest lands, in many cases valued much more for recreation than for timber products, much more valued for quiet sports, and really even trails of all sorts. So even the desire for what our forests produce have changed. So we came up with this idea and presented it to the Environmental Trust Fund. And basically our goal is to deliver a spatially explicit landscape level decision tool that integrates forest productivity, ecosystem services, and economic information to help or assist woodland managers, forest managers identify benefits and trade-offs of different land management decisions, especially as they're affected by climate through time. What it can do, it can provide you with a snapshot, an opportunity to evaluate how changing climate, changing markets might affect Minnesota's forests, what that's going to look like, the ecosystem services that they provide, and a glimpse into how the public values these ecosystem services. We try to be really clear about what it can't do. It is not going to help you manage a parcel. This is a landscape level tool. It may not even accurately identify your parcel through time. There's no way for us to integrate or incorporate individual management decisions at the parcel level across the landscape. And in this particular case, when I say landscape, we're talking 3.8 million acres. Just getting that information alone from all the managers would be a very difficult task. So it's not designed to help you manage a parcel, but it can help you get a sense of where the forest is going potentially and how you might manage your parcel, either to move in that direction or to provide a different set of services that you're more interested in. So with that, this all really starts with a forest landscape model. So we used Landis 2. It's again, a spatial temporal modeling tool, simulate forest composition, structure change through time. So it really starts with quantifying or characterizing current forest conditions, developing those management scenarios, coming up with harvest scenarios based on land ownership and forest cover types, modeling them. And once we have those outputs, handing them off to our sub-modeling teams for them to apply their models to, and then providing that tool out of that. So within that, let's talk a little bit about Landis. So again, Landis is a forest landscape change model. It was first created back in the mid-90s, and it's become a bit of a very useful tool by virtue of the fact that individuals will add modules to it to help them investigate things they're interested in. And so it's in many ways a crowdsourced computer program or piece of software that is continually growing. So it's a very dynamic piece of software and has the ability to simulate a wide variety of things. So basically, it'll simulate ecological processes, including succession, seed dispersal, disturbance, and climate change over a forested landscape through time. The key thing is that, in my opinion, is that ability really to include ingrowth. So forest change over time, you'll get ingrowth. If you harvest, it'll reset according to whatever your harvest parameters are. And so it really tends to model actual succession, how a stand might move through time with management or without management. And that forest change really is that function of dynamics of growth, succession, management, climate. It works more on a biomass basis. So it aggregates biomass, and as it peaks, then kind of these succession models start to kick in. So we're working at a 4-hectare spatial grid. So again, kind of back to this concept of it may or may not work very well for a parcel. The actual management unit is 4 hectares in size. It simulates succession to disturbance on that spatial grid. And inputs in this particular case came from studies that were done in the region by Duvenik and Lukash, where basically they've taken climate data from the ecoregions, so soils, climate, forest ownership, stand maps, and harvest prescriptions, and kind of created that base layer of what does our forest look like at this time. And if you think about it, one way to think about it is the way we extrapolate FIA data, which in large part is what they do. Extrapolate FIA plot data to similar sites. And again, right, based on ecoregions, based on soil, based on climate. So the spatial framework pretty much works like this. You have your initial communities. Those communities are grouped into things that are like each other. So those are grouped into stands, and then management is based on ownership. So it's a likelihood to manage. So a private owner has a different likelihood to manage than the state versus the federal versus tribal lands versus industrial lands. And those are based largely on the FIA timber products output reports and FIA inventories of where the roundwood products are coming off of what lands. And that's, again, through history, those changes are kind of mapped using historic. So we're basically using kind of that static 20-year evaluation of where wood is coming off of and projecting that as the likelihood to harvest into the future, which of course may or may not change, but that's something that we really have no handle on. We have 12 scenarios that we've committed to as part of this. One is business as usual. So there are 4 harvest scenarios, and 3 climate scenarios. Of the 4 harvest scenarios or management scenarios is business as usual, increasing harvest by 30% across the landscape, decreasing it by 30, and then maximum carbon sequestration and modeling using forest vegetation simulator, decreasing harvest by 30% and then increasing harvest times and then harvest times between thinnings and increasing rotation lengths tended to give us the most carbon in any one given stand for all species. And then 3 climate scenarios. Historic, which is essentially the current climate tracked through time. Low emission, so this is an IPCC model B1, which calls for essentially a 50% increase in energy production and the attendant carbon emissions from that. And then the IPCC A1F1 climate scenario, which is actually a 400% increase in energy production and the carbon attendant with that. And you can kind of get a sense, and my apologies that this did not blow up as well as I thought it would, of kind of what these scenarios look like. And of course, the A1F1 is going this way, and the B1 is this green line. So the B1 relates to kind of a low emission scenario. The A1F1 relates to a high emission scenario. So, and again, this concept of outputs, as we look at them, they're at a broad landscape level, not necessarily local. If you look at current climate and an increase of harvest percent, total harvest declined under that high climate change with an increase in harvest intensity due to reduced growth of aspen. So we can increase harvest, but under that high climate change, we see a decline in aspen overall across the landscape. And so there's a lot of moving parts, I think is the key message. And then again, consider them at a broad expanse. Again, total harvest decline under the harvest change, even with a 30% increase in harvesting, again, because of a decline in aspen. And again, this is 80 years out, what our aspen resource might look like under that high emission scenario. So our habitat suitability modeling, many of you are probably familiar with the WINGS model. John Zobel, Alan Eck updated it in 2014. Within the tool, we have 60 mammal species and 85 bird species. They're essentially qualified by forest class size, so which provides the best habitat for whatever that species might be, sapling, pole, saw, or decadent over mature. The team kind of made the decision to look at a quarter township area, so 9 square miles. Essentially, because it's a habitat suitability index, breaking this down at a stand level produces almost meaningless data. Your changes may be points of a percentage in an individual stand because of just how the model works. So their decision was to aggregate it at 9 square miles to give you a better sense. And again, it goes back to that heart of changes at a stand level can be very small, may be very impactful for an individual, but across the entire stand may be very small for across that landscape. So, and of course the scores were 1 to 10 across landscape cover type, and then the habitat suitability index was then calculated. So, and here's again a sense of the outputs. So this is for black bear, and Ron Moan ran this for me, and it's just really a comparison of all the outputs for black bear through the year 2100, and black bear seemed to do very well under that low emissions standard and with increasing harvest. So not so much change caused by climate change, and a lot of early successional forests on the landscape. Black bear seems to do the worst under high climate change, where rotations are lengthened out. So not as much decline in harvesting later successional forests. So again, that's a sample of black bear and some of the outputs you can see. Again, other thing to look at is how much change, how much difference there is in terms of that index of, you know, again, the habitat suitability is probably about double for black bear under a low climate emissions, high harvesting scenario versus high climate emissions and low harvesting scenario. Our water quantity modeling, one of the long-term issues we've been dealing with is kind of the concepts of quantity and quality. How does water quality change with harvesting? And one of the things that I think most of us are familiar with or aware of through best management practices for water quality, in most cases, changes after a harvest tend to be very flashy. And it's not always easy to detect non-point source from harvesting that you can directly relate to that harvesting. At which point is it a point source or not a point source for pollutants? I believe MFRC is actually discussing, David Wilson will be discussing the latest update or report out here this morning to the Minnesota Forest Resources Council. And so early on, they felt that quality was going to be very hard to get their arms around. And so instead looked at water quantity and how that changes following harvests in a watershed. So they use something called the Hydrologic and Water Quality Model, HSPF. The watersheds that we looked at were the Cloquet River, South Superior, Lake Superior South, sorry, Mississippi River, Grand Rapids, and St. Louis River. Within those 4 watersheds, there are 437 sub-watersheds, and each one of these are modeled at the sub-watershed level. Again, they're modeling those forest transitions really from clear cuts. So again, they don't see a lot of change in thinnings or in single tree selection, but in clear cut, then they do see those changes at the landscape level that do see water quality impacts. So again, model inputs include climate, so the historical and future climate scenarios, forest cover outputs from Landis, those are matched in that HSPF model, and then forest water use parameters for the different classifications for the cover types. and then external nutrient inputs were kept fixed. So again, those parameters give you a little bit better sense. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. Snow shading parameters are set by Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, adjusted for the different biomass classes, sediment loading. So all these things are kind of considered within those models as part of those outputs then that you'll see. And so again, there are 2-year return period flow, spring high flow, 10th quartile, and the 90th. Summer low flow, the water quality outputs, sediment concentrations, total phosphorus, total nitrogen. Again, HSPF are calibrated using stream flow and water quality data for the major tributaries only. Assume that forest water use is different for the different classifications, but that's unlimited data. And then changes in nutrient loading were assumed to be due to changes in stream bank erosion only. So again, not overland flow, decomposition, just kind of purely that sedimentation and the pollutants that were attached to that. And ecosystem services modeling. So Soleil Mamoun is our natural resource ecologist at NRI and Twin Cities campus, and he did the ecosystem services valuation. And so what he chose to do in this particular case was a choice experiment design. Essentially, it's a willingness to pay, for those of you who are familiar with that concept. But it really asks people to think about how they value natural resources. And my apologies, there's a missing slide there. So we'll just stick with this. So essentially 8,000 surveys were sent out to individuals in the forested portions of our test of the Arrowhead counties. Residents in 11 counties in forested areas, not urban, not really kind of non-forested ag portions. Surveys were completed online using Qualtrics, and they used the econometric methods to determine value of those ecosystem services from the survey responses. And so what they were asked to do is consider this. So timber production, carbon sequestration, water quality, game species habitat, non-game species habitat, and their monthly utility bills. And so they were given the choices of, as you can see, for the top 5 of no change, 10% increase, 50% increase, 10% increase, 50% decrease. And then for their additional monthly utility bills, there were 7 changes, all the way up to a 100% change. And so essentially what they were given were 4 different management scenarios to pick from. They were given 6 times they were asked their preferences to kind of zero in or kind of balance a little bit what the reality was. And so for timber production, Plan 1 might be no change, Plan 2 might be a 10% increase, Plan 3 might be a 50% increase. They might have a $20 a month change in their utility bill to pay for improved ecosystem services, or 50 or 10, or no change. And so kind of what that looks like is, balanced across the respondents of this survey of what would they prefer to see as ecosystem services on the landscape, and what would they prefer to pay for them. The negative values are essentially where they vote against. So under a high climate and decreased harvest, overall, it provides them with things that they don't want, and they're voting against that. And you can see most people kind of voted against everything, which again, may simply be that they do not want to see changes in their electric bills, or they're unwilling. A better way to say it, I guess, is they're unwilling to pay for the increases or decreases in ecosystem services. And these are just some examples. So with that, just our project team, again, this is recorded and I've provided Lane with the PowerPoint, but George Host really was the guy who got this ball rolling and retired. So I took over as the principal investigator on this. Ron Moan, Chris Wright, Lucinda Johnson here at NRI were the co-investigators. Our modeling team included Alexis Grindy, Katya Kovalenko, Steve Colby, Josh Bedner, May Kai, Saleh Mamoun. Chris Johnson and Jane Reed are the brains behind the tool we'll be looking at in a moment. Christy Nixon and Will Barch in our GIS lab. Down at CFANS, Stephen Pulaski helped with the economics. May Davenport and Sarah Fellows helped with the development of the questionnaires, the landowner, as well as the manager, what their thoughts were, what they valued, and then Bill Herb at the St. Anthony Falls lab with the water modeling. So, and this project was collaborative across the campuses and the research labs at the University of Minnesota, with guidance provided by an advisory committee that spanned agencies, industries, local government, tribal. And we were funded through the Environmental and Natural Resources Trust Fund, and certainly want to thank them for their help with this project, for their funding and support. So with that, I think, quickly, any questions about what I've presented so far?
Feel free to put questions in the chat and we'll just answer them as we think of them, as you'll think of them.
Hey, Scott. So what use is this? What we hope is it really will provide a sense of projection. Landis is the most complex landscape change or forest landscape change model available to us. You can go online and find any number of tools, maps that may say, hey, this is what we think our forests are going to look like in 2070 or 2100. Landis is probably the most complex of the maps that you'll see. Again, it's working kind of at a lower resolution, climate, ingrowth. So it's not just valuing whether a tree species will be able to adapt to a changing climate, but how they'll ingrow into stands, how succession will proceed, and how harvesting may affect that. So from that standpoint, it gives us probably the best sense or best look at what our forest composition may look like under the different climate scenarios 10, 50, 100 years out. And that, I think, is where it starts to become useful to, again, kind of landscape level managers. Again, it will not help you manage a 40. It might in that under a high climate scenario, if you value red oak and you see red oak checking out long term to make a decision about where is it best on the landscape. If you want to keep it, where is it best adapted on this landscape under a changing climate, and to work towards either through planting or through management to maintain it. So it's those kind of bigger questions that it's going to answer. Hey, Emily. So yeah, that is one of those look under the hood things. If you're interested to join us on the 29th, it's extremely complex. So each land ownership has its own set for each cover type, forest cover type. Those were defined by those managers. So DNR, silviculturalists, industry folks, the U.S. Forest Service, the county, and they're given, we did a survey of them and they were really given a suite of kind of questions to answer about how they handle. So for instance, how are you handling aspen harvest? Is it simply a clear cut? What percentage do you leave? What age do you harvest at? So the actual prescriptions are based on what the managers are saying they do, they literally do, and then those are applied to those lands, those individual lands for those individual species. Where it becomes kind of problematic, of course, is like I said, we're not growing individual parcels or individual lands. It is an extrapolation across the landscape from FIA data. It is a likelihood to harvest. So for instance, there may be available, and of course, for those of you who fool around with FIA data like I do, we're harvesting about 40% of the annual growth. So we've got quite a bit of our forest land that are succeeding into different species. So some lands will be harvested, even if a property or parcel is eligible for harvest. Certainly it might not, because simply the demand for that wood isn't there. And so then it may move through time, or it may get harvested at a later date. So again, it's like I say, it's one of the more complex models, which is why we chose it, because it will actually kind of model that what's going on the landscape in the way that it's actually happening through management.
Thomas Kroll, I see you've raised your hand. I'm going to.
Hey, Tom.
You can. Where'd you go? If you'd like, I can allow you to talk. Otherwise, you could enter your question into chat. You should be able to talk and unmute here if you'd like, Tom. Otherwise, you can just ask the question in chat.
My mistake.
There we go.
My mistake.
Hey, Tom.
Yeah, it's just a mistake on my button. Sorry.
No worries.
Not a problem. Well, if there aren't any more questions, then let's go ahead and take a look at the tool itself. I'm going to go ahead and put into the chat the link, and then I'll switch over to that screen. Let's see. Yep, Lane, it looks like it's just going to go to you. If you can share that out with everybody. Thank you. Now let's go over to the tool. So some of you may have seen this before. I apologize. I'm not sure who all is on the call today, but we have put this together and it's ready for the rollout. And so anyone can go in to this. You can access it. There is certainly, of course, our home button brings you to our main page. About, you can get an overview of the project. Again, people, funding, we've discussed a bit. You can look at the methodology for each one of the systems, where you can get a deeper dive into what was done and get a better, more complex explanation for each one of those. And again, of course, the help and the frequently asked questions sections, again, on each one of these. So the tool itself, you have two different ways to access it, certainly, again, at that bar at the bottom, or just go to use the ForCAST tool. And my apologies, I was doing a run through with Lane earlier and to demonstrate it. So let me back out here. So as you come in right away, you'll come to the disclaimer. And again, it's really this concept of this can be a useful tool to you at a landscape level. It's not going to help you manage at the parcel level. So go ahead and click, you've read the disclaimer, and use the tool. And right away, it comes up with a tour that will walk you through and describe how to go about starting a simulation of interest to you. So essentially, you'll create an area of interest, choose your climate and forest management scenarios in a year in the future you want to take a look at. Select what you want to look at within the models. So carbon, black bear, water quality, or just the economic assessments, or any and all of them. And then the summaries and charts you can look at. So we'll take a look at all these things. But again, that tools button will be open to you as you come in. So first thing you do is create an area of interest. So you can just simply by scrolling your mouse, zoom in, move this around. But again, select an area of interest to you. And again, you're just creating a simple area of interest. And we'll just kind of pick the middle of nowhere. And again, as you do this, what you'll see is kind of these quarter townships. So if you're looking kind of over here, you'll see how many sub-catchments you've selected, the square miles, or how many quarter townships. And again, that has to do with the fact that the water quality assessments and the wildlife habitat assessments are different because of the different what they're actually evaluating. So we'll just grab 30 of the quarter townships. So you just click to finish, and then you can save. So again, select your climate scenario. So we'll just go historical. No expected change in forest products industry. We'll go out to the year 2100. And so we'll save our model. One of the things as you go through this is the developers have created something they call a breadcrumb. So if you look at the bottom here, you can always see what you've selected for climate, forest management, year, and then we'll talk about layer here in a second. And so at any time, if you want to go back and change your climate, you can just by clicking on that button. If I want to change my forest management. So it's kind of a neat little piece that our team has incorporated that it's fun to kind of point out so that you know that's there. So model outputs, what do we want to look at? And so cover type we'll select and save that. And so this gives you a sense of under no change to the climate. So essentially in 2100, the climate will be exactly the same as it is today. No change to forest management practices, so assume something on the order of 2.8 million cords coming off of roundwood. Year 2100, and here's our cover type layer, and again, you can see the different types. So that's our output. Different way to look at it is by these charts. And so quite literally under historic climate, no change in management, we really see kind of no change in the forest cover types whatsoever for this 16 quarter townships or 30 quarter townships, excuse me, for this parcel or this area that I've selected. And within the outputs, you can kind of see this concept of what are the biggest three winners and what are the biggest three losers, or which species increase the most in their relative frequency across the landscapes and which ones decline the most. So as I said, we can look at cover type, but we also have all the other things you can look at. So for instance, if you're interested in non-game species. So these are grouped, and you can see it's porcupine, flying squirrels, voles, white-footed mouse, chipmunk. You look at fur bearers, so beaver, gray wolf, lynx, bobcat, marten, fisher. Small game species, snowshoe hare, or game species, moose, beaver, gray wolf, fox, skins. So species of special concern, moose, Canada lynx, or greatest concern. So we can take a look at species of special concern. And so again, this is a suitability index, not how many there are per square mile, but where are these areas that will be most suitable, or where the habitat will be the best for these particular species. So again, charts provide a little bit of sense of what's in here. And again, because there's literally no change across the landscape, we're really seeing no difference. If there was, you can kind of see the reference data, the current is just completely, the scenario we've set completely overlaps the reference data. So there's no expected change for species of greatest concern if there's no change to the climate and no change to management. So that's kind of under those historic. So let's take a look at what might be a worst case scenario, perhaps for forest products industry. So high emissions, a decline in harvest. So we'll save that as our scenario setup. And now you can see, again, for species of greatest concern, how that changes. And actually going to later successional species, older forests, we're actually seeing an improvement of about 3% in the habitat suitability index. So again, small changes, small area, but we're seeing that. And so we can kick back out of this and go to layer. And let's take a look at maybe how the forest has changed and what might be responsible for that change that we're seeing. And so again, red maple oak has absolutely blossomed. We've seen a 50% decline in aspen, 83% decline in elm ash, black locust across this area. So again, moving away from early successional species, moving towards later successional species. Huge decline in black spruce. So again, right, high climate emissions, so large changes to the climate. So again, changes to the cover types, the age classes will certainly mean changes for the species. So that's cover type. Another way to look at this is stand age. And so this is really just the age. It's not cohort necessarily, and you can't really necessarily overlap the two. So again, we're seeing less harvesting, and what you're seeing is about a 2% relative increase to the age. So some stands are getting older, some are not. Again, we've seen a huge drop of aspen and black spruce, elm ash, black locust under that scenario, but we've seen increases in oak and maple, for instance. So again, stand age is one of those I'm always a little bit leery about as someone who did FIA data collection of things change across the landscape. So we may see some older forests. We're certainly seeing a transition to some different forest types, which are longer lived. So let's jump into, let me go back and switch out. We'll go back to historical climate, and we'll go to max carbon sequestration. And let's take a look at the economic valuation. So this kind of gives you a sense of, again, if climate doesn't change, but we change our management practices to sequester more carbon across the landscape, how the public values those outputs or those services of, by far and away, carbon sequestration. There's a willingness to pay for that. There's less willingness or least willingness to pay for timber production. So social values towards timber production decline, social values towards carbon sequestration increase. And that's, again, just personal values or those values of those individuals, what they're willing to pay for in services from woodlands. So I'll stop there and see if anyone has any questions. Again, you have the link to it. I suspect some of you have been fooling around with it while we've been talking. Any questions really about kind of how the tool works? Or how to access some different scenarios? Folks are quiet this morning. Can I say I hope it's because everybody's actually fooling around with the tool and seeing how it works? One of the things we didn't look at, let me touch on that briefly, because that's something that has actually come up quite a bit in discussions with folks. So I'll redraw my area. And let's go with a low climate emission and an increase in harvest. And then model output, let's look at carbon. So how will carbon change across the landscape? And so again, we're looking at a low emission scenario. We're going to increase our harvesting. And what does that look like in terms of carbon sequestration or carbon storage across the forest? And under that scenario, we just lost power here for a second, Lane. Hopefully that won't be a permanent thing. Is forecasted to increase by 22%. And one of the things I need to be very clear about, we haven't talked about at this point, is that with the tool we used and the scenarios we used this time around, this is only above ground carbon. So it's only above ground carbon, it's only above ground biomass. With the next iteration of the tool, we're currently working on taking this to statewide. We will be looking at above ground and below ground, and we'll be looking at harvested biomass as well. It'll be interesting to see what we'll be able to accomplish with harvested biomass. The difficulties there are simply there's very little good data. We really rely on the timber products output report, and for those of you who have worked with that or familiar with FIA, the responsiveness to those surveys tends to be low. They can't produce very good data for us on what kind of roundwood products are coming in, what residuals are left in the forest, what are the mill residuals, what are the utilization specifications. So it's something we're going to take a look at, and we'll see how close we can get to what we're seeing in terms of carbon that comes off the forest and then carbon that gets put into long-lived products, as well as some sort of life cycle assessment to where we can evaluate within that 2100 years of as things are harvested, how are they staying stored as carbon, or is carbon staying stored in that product, or is it landfilled or decomposing? So, but I wanted to just touch on that briefly because that is something that the advisory committee has brought to our attention. That is of great interest, especially as MFRC is moving forward with a forest carbon plan for the state, providing some ability to evaluate those things. And within this, at this time, that's not possible. But with the next iteration, we should be able to address most, if not all of those. So it looks like we've got a few more questions. Yeah, Emily, is the geography going to expand? Yes. We received a second round of funding from the trust fund, and we're going to do the entire forested extent of the state. So essentially, if it is identified by FIA as forested land, we will be evaluating it. So we will cover the entire forested extent in this next round. That tool should be out in a couple years. We're just getting started right now on the characterization, which includes certainly who owns those lands. So again, so we can develop the silviculture appropriate to that ownership, as well as the cover types for those as well. So yeah, Lacey, that's great. Is there a description for novice users of the climate models, which should be used for different circumstances? I'll have to dig into that, Lacey. I think we can certainly put the links into the different IPCC. So I apologize, folks. The IPCC is the International Program for Climate Change, and what those look like. You know, it's really hard to say. And I guess I put it this way, it seems like we're constantly blowing through the warnings from climate scientists. I would say at the very least, as I try to look out to 50 years in the future, low seems to make a lot of sense. If I was going to model out and see what I wanted to see in the year 2100, high might make more. One of the things we're going to be looking at in this next round is, are these models even valid? They were based on the 2015 IPCC models. I think IPCC has just come out with new ones. These may not even be valid anymore. So it's a science that's constantly evolving that we're going to have to take a look at. Katie, so your AOI can be as big as you want it. It's what the limitation is probably your computer and network speed. The bigger the area, the more it's probably going to grind. At this point, you can't custom the AOI. You can select down to the sub-watersheds instead of the quarter townships. But basically what we found is you can kind of ask it to do the entire area. It just takes a while. So. Scott, future ash, is it all going to be gone? You know what? In this particular one, we did not include disturbances. So at this time, we do not have fire, emerald ash borer, some of the really big ones that have potential for landscape change. In the next round, as we do the forested extent, we're going to include all the major categories, as well as we'll be talking with, again, all the major landholders, school trust lands, DNR, federal, tribal, of what concerns, what worries they see, what's out there in the future. Again, if there are modules that assist us in doing that, we'll add them. But we did not have them available to us and did not include them at this time. So when we do the forested extent of the state, we will include that, and we'll have a much better handle on what that might look like as we toss climate change and emerald ash borer into the mix. And I'm not sure, Lane, about the credits.
Yes, I think hopefully it was just fixing the hyperlink.
Oh, okay.
That was it. If folks are having trouble reaching that form, let me know, and I can play around with it.
Yep.
But John, I actually have a question. So thinking about the fire, and even some of these other disturbances that might be changing at an accelerating rate, where your historical data might not be able to accurately forecast the future. So you're chuckling. Maybe this is kind of a vexing problem for y'all. How will you go about doing that? Just kind of broad strokes.
Yeah. So the good news here is, and I'm not sure how many people kind of deal with fire. Through the co-op fire program between the federal government, U.S. Forest Service, and DNR, there are some excellent historical fire data sets. Now, a lot of this only dates back maybe 40 years. But normally we have forest cover type, and I need to get into the reporting some more. So my apologies for those of you who know me. I worked in Nebraska, and we can have all sorts of fun about Nebraska, but being a forester in Nebraska, sorry, but I headed up the fire response program there. And so, you know, the data collected goes down to, you know, how many people worked it, how many person hours, what types of equipment. But really the key thing is size of the fire, forest cover type. We can match that with climate data for that year, and what caused it. And so that's some of the things that actually I'll be working on here in the coming weeks to build that kind of data set for what historically, what has fire looked like on the landscape, you know, kind of what's been caused or what's been the cause, how much has burned, which cover types burn, what's the age of those stands, and trying to get a better handle on that. And so with that information, then it can be integrated into one of these sub-processes or sub-models within Landis as it does the forest succession modeling to incorporate, you know, again, across the landscape. And, you know, it does things by averages, right? If a 50-year average is we're burning 4,000 acres a year, it's going to torch off 4,000 acres a year. And if, you know, we're largely burning off gray wood, dead tamarack, and black spruce, that's going to burn off gray wood. So again, it's a model, and models have their flaws, but I'm so damn old that I still remember back in the day when computer programming, we talked about garbage in, garbage out. So we'll try and put in the best possible input into the best possible model, and it'll give us the best possible output. And the only way to know is in 2030, we can check and see just how close we came to the mark. I apologize, I've not been scrolling down. Tom, yep, the chart uses those current, could share the meanings, baseline, current, and reference. Yep, so it's, I think, Tom, so I'll have to take a look at that. So the concept basically is, certainly with climate, there's just a lot of weirdness in how people use it. We've chosen the term historic rather than current to basically give that sense of, you know, as we look back through time and come up with that trend where we're at today and how that trend goes into the future. It's really based off of that, whereas low emissions, high emissions are really based on how those things have changed or how those projections change climate through time. So baseline, yeah, I got to take a look at that. Our developers. So this is the fun of juggling 6 different modeling teams that no one's caught that before, Tom. So thank you. So again, baseline and the reference are almost always going to refer to that same thing of this is going to be your kind of no change scenario. If nothing changes in terms of climate or management, this will be your reference or your baseline to those changes. That's a great catch. I owe you a cup of coffee, Tom, for being the person who caught an error. But thank you for that. And I'm somewhat covered in shame, so you can get a really expensive cup of coffee. Well, folks, please feel free to reach out to me. Feel free to reach out to Lane. I'll throw, I think, Lane, I'll make sure my contact information is on the page. Like I say, we're still in the process. We've got a lot of work to do. We're going to be working through, again, kind of that valuation all over again. We're also going to be working with, again, all our stakeholders to identify priorities, what's important, what's valued, what do they see the future, some visioning exercises to really help us move this forward into this next round as we go to the forested extent of the state. So again, don't be afraid to reach out. I hope to see you on the 29th for those of you who really want a closer look under the hood at the models. The way that we're playing this or thinking about it is we're going to actually have the modeling teams there. If you have a real deep interest in the water quality and quantity or the wildlife or carbon, how those things are calculated, how you can use that information, that'll be your opportunity to talk to that team, to learn more about the model, to kind of get that look under the hood, as well as maybe to get some help doing some really refined or specific analysis or evaluation. So, but again, your comments are welcome, your questions are welcome, and we hope that this tool is actually of value and use in your considerations. So thank you all so much for your time and attention today.